Hey, this will be a pretty rough screencast here. I just wanted to show something I'm working on as far as the assignment studio and rubric tools. So we're about 5 hours into development of the Open Studio and the rubric assessment tools. Basically what creating is a way that students can submit work. If you've seen this stuff with Open Studio previously, there's content types that are submission, and then based on filling out an affiliated assignment, that dictates what the fields are, so that you can either upload images or save videos here, or add links or files. We're working on some stuff with workflow states and ironing things out. In that regard, it's all responsive. I'm not going to bother scaling it. You can see there's my files down there. We've got some mood indicator type of stuff so that students would come through and kind of talk about each other's work, have a social community. The piece I'm working on now is more of the back-end assessment piece as far as rubrics are concerned. So rubrics are broken out. We've got a couple content types here affiliated with them. The basic idea is that there's a rubric, which is one large content type. It has lots and lots of fields, uses field collections and things. And then there's basically another content type that utilizes that rubric using an assessment strategy. So, for example, there's a peer evaluation type of rubric methodology, self-assessment methodology, and then there's submission assessment, which is the more traditional, instructor creates a rubric, and then they use that rubric to grade someone's work. The peer evaluation and the self-assessment are kind of different sides of the same coin, but it's evaluating people. So the rubric could be structured differently. The reason it's split out this way is that then, based on permissions, a faculty member can be the ones that make these, or instructional designers. Students could theoretically submit a peer evaluation or a self-assessment, but they couldn't submit more of a submission assessment kind of a thing. So let's dig into what a rubric content type looks like. So at our high level, we've got the type of assessment, which is basically just saying which of those other three this can be used for. There's the content, which is just saying a description of what this rubric is about, the name of the rubric, and then from there we go into categories. Categories drills down, and so you can have an unlimited number of categories. And categories look something like this. So each category has a title. It's got long text details if needed. It's made up of unlimited criteria, and then there's some hidden values that can be used by the instructors, such as feedback on that category overall, points possible, and points that have been awarded for the category. You'll notice these are hidden, so I'm actually going to be using these fields to pass this data around and calculate it based on another interface so that the instructor is not filling that out. So I said categories are made up of criteria. Criteria have title, again, details at that at the criteria level. Then criteria are broken out into levels. So if you think of our example that we have here is the highest level category is personal narrative or artwork. It would be a larger piece of an assignment, and then you're breaking that assignment into categories. The criteria would be things like under personal narrative, it would be something like spelling or content and writing. And then levels underneath there would be more of your good, better, best evaluation type of criteria, the thing you'd be clicking on to say it's worth this many points. There are some additional things at this layer too. So in the criteria, we'll be keeping track of the level that's been assessed. So that's basically which level did they click on. And then the possible points, so that's a calculated value, again, it's hidden. So that's the highest level point value available in that, the levels within this criteria. And then there's criteria points, which can actually be variable from what the assessed level is that you click. Delving into what a level is at the end, and I still have some additional fields to add to this. So there's the title, there's points associated with it, and then there's rationale and suggested remediation. And I'm going to show with an actual example what that is. So this is extremely rough, but where's the rubric? So we've got a rubric here. you'll see at the highest level I mentioned personal narrative. So this is kind of my description of the rubric, title of the rubric. We've got this category here, which is personal narrative. And then here's a description of what personal narrative is about. Here's the first criteria within personal narrative, which is content and writing. And then here are the levels within content and writing. So we've got excellent, which is worth 10 points potentially. And these are the rationale statements as to why you received excellent. Then we've got adequate, and you'll see adequate we split into the rationale versus suggested remediation. So the idea would be that if you're up here, you probably have a lot of rationale as to why you got it and very little remediation. And if you're all the way down here, you've probably got a ton of remediation and no rationale. These statements are kind of a positive and negative of two sides of the coin kind of a thing. So as far as doing an adequate job, you could meet most of the assignment requirements, but you need a more detailed explanation of your artwork to reflect your interests. Something else that I'm toying with right now is the notion of there's points, but there's actually a range to it. So this interface would have a default number. It would kind of have a range. So you'd say what the high and low is of each of these levels. So excellent might be 10 through 9. Adequate might be 8 through 7. And then inadequate might be 6 through 4. And absent, is 1 to 0 or something like that. That if you're selecting absent when you're filling out the rubric, not building it, but filling it out, that it would default to the lowest amount of points possible, and that you would have arrows where you could basically just click through and add points in either direction. Whereas inadequate and adequate, it would take the midpoint of whatever the points are that you selected. So if it's a range of 8 to 5 points, it's going to pick 7 as a default or something, or you can even pick the default. You could always click and shift away from there. Something else I think would be good to do with this would be, so the instructor might come through and say, okay, you did an adequate job. Why did you do an adequate job? Well, because you met these 2 requirements. And hey, you need to do both of these to do a better job. But I must say that you did a really good job of organizing this. So why wouldn't we give you, the excellent rationale as well as the inadequate? So maybe you did a really crappy job on certain things, like you didn't proofread your writing, but it was well organized, right? So that doesn't actually fit into adequate because we're not going to have a mix of all of these values. It would be great to give students, to say, here are the few statements you did that were excellent, here's the few statements you did that were adequate, and this is why you need to remediate on these. And then, hey, you did this one thing that at an inadequate level. So you can actually get into an additional level of more subjective feedback, even though you're still quantifying it, so that you're not just giving people a yes, no, or a good, better, best. You're actually defining why they're getting good, better, best. What will happen as far as from grading this, if you will, is so this would be on the building side, that you would have more of an overview, right? So that as a faculty member, you can just kind of get an idea of what this rubric is you've created. This is not actually how you go through and grade. That interface has to be built. But the idea is that you would then use this, so we do like submission assessment. And if we look at submission assessment has the same complex field collection categories, criteria, levels, remediation, rationale, all that. It still drills down to the same degree because it's using the same field set. But then it has additional who is this for? We've got an assignment of some kind. We've got the title. Again, this would be auto generated. We have an overall feedback statement that could be left. So if the faculty member wanted to just leave a like, hey, you did great work on this as a whole, you could have that statement at this level. You can also drill into these deeper levels. So there's I believe a space. Yeah, here's feedback. So this feedback is actually associated with the category. So you could have per category or per criteria feedback that's generated, so that you could give people more detail as to where they did or need help beyond your canned statements that you have. If you have enough canned statements, hopefully you don't have to make other types of feedback. Points earned, that's going to be a auto-generated value based on the things that are selected. There's the group audience, which is a section. in our system. And then we've also got this. So we've got the original rubric association will be kept in here. And the reason why we're not just using the original rubric is a couple years from now that rubric might change, right? So we don't want to have to manage, dozens and dozens of copy and pastes effectively of the same rubric. We probably want to use almost the same rubric, tweak it a little bit based on the analytic data that we generate off of this, which we will be doing a ton of. But this will basically copy from that original rubric all of the field selections that were made there and then lock them so they can't be changed. So what that will effectively do is you'll have kind of an instance of what the rubric was at the time that you made the assessment. Why that's important is maybe you reuse the same rubric throughout the course, and you apply the same rubric methodology to assessing lots of work, and you notice a typo or something silly later on, or you want to add additional statements deep down in here and the levels with suggested remediations. If you were to modify this, those suggested remediations may be starting to kind of overflow into areas they shouldn't. What this will let you do is you're locking in place the way they were graded at that time, but you're not pegged to it for all eternity, kind of a thing. So still obviously need a lot of UI work. This is mostly just scaffolding and rambling at this point, but starting to get it put together with assignments, so the assignments can be created. They have very simple requirements, and you see if we go into like our section here, we can actually go to section. We can manage the assignments and set things like a color for the assignment, numbers and sub-numbers. This would be important when it comes to referencing this information from other systems, because everything in ELMS Learning Network is a web service. And then setting basic, hey, these are what is required of this assignment. So we could save them as a whole, or that we could look at this one and just clone it off and make slight tweaks to it. I believe that this has, I wanted to show that. So this has already built in some validation in terms of what has to be unique. So this is saying that for this section, I can't reuse this number and sub-number combination because I already have something called 1-2. So if I make this 1-3, and we add another one, then we've got it in there. So there's our clone of assignment 2. It'll have all the same directions, except we've made our tweaks to it. Has the same initial due dates. Even has the same color wheel if we want to associate a color to it. So we'll make it that dark green. And then, we could just bump this to March or something. And save. So now we have a third assignment in here. This would be more of what the students would see as an overview, so they could create a submission against it. They could see a lot of people are submitting that. Oh, actually, sorry, this would be the student. It would be, here are the requirements of this due date, very high level. Faculty could at a high level glance and see, oh, hey, this due date's coming up. We've got all these submissions. I know there's 100 people in the course, and we've only got 50 or something like that. Hey, I should probably send out a reminder. Stuff like that. Where color and other things come into play is if a submission is affiliated with an assignment, then you'll see these start to fill out in this dashboard type of a view. So this is one that I submitted. There's an energy value, and again, this stuff is hidden behind the scenes. But this starts at 100 and then ticks down. And the connotation is if you're submitting to a public space, the longer something sits there, then the less energy it has. You'll notice this is now grayed out. But if a lot of people are talking about something, if people are leaving little emotional statements associated with it, if they're adding comments to it and having a discussion about it, that they're actually able to increase the energy of it and kind of raise it back up in the list, which you'll see I actually ticked energy off of it because something we have in place at the moment is if people are talking about something a lot, that's great, but we want everyone's work to be talked about. And so if the next person comes in at a glance, we don't want to just, I wanted to show that to the achievements. We don't want just their work to be talked about. So it only ticked off one because I'm still posting everything. So when a new person posts, it'll tick off an energy point. So that's another way that things can, quote unquote, degrade. And so this will fade away further, but that way when people submit new things, those things are nice and bright. They're filtered to the front of the list. And then as things have been talked about for a while, or if they've been submitted a long time ago, then they kind of start to fade away in the list. They can still be gotten to. I can still sort and say, just give me assignment 1, which is not there. And you say, give me assignment 2. It's within that section. I could do those kinds of things. But it will be kind of buried away a little bit more. I noticed there it said I had an achievement unlocked. We've got an achievement system I'm playing with as well in here to try and encourage people to participate in the community. So these are really easy to add. I just added some basic ones. But hey, you posted 5 comments, keep up work, critique, and things like that. Kind of trying to gamify this space a little bit. Hey, you created your first submission, welcome to the studio kind of a thing, as well as ones for social ratings, which aren't calculating correctly at the moment, but that if you go around and you're, liking people's posts and you're saying, leaving emotional responses as to how you felt about things, that there's also points you can get associated with that. We don't do anything with this information. This is still, experimental system, but it would be cool to encourage people to participate in the experience and kind of gamify it, but then actually turn that into a grade of sorts that, your participation in the community is directly related to your participation grade. So that you're not just submitting the 10 assignments, you're actually going around and talking about other people's work. You could tie extra credit and things to that to say, well, if you have to talk about 10 other people's works and you talked about 20, okay, maybe you get something extra for that. Maybe that's an achievement because that's above the baseline. So this is kind of the current state of this system. We've got it, it integrated very easily because the ELMS Learning Network, as I said, this really didn't take very long to spin up. So I'm going to keep working away on this. The rubric portion will be available under Rubric. The studio, the rest of it will be available under CLE, and it'll be included in the ELMS Learning Network package on GitHub.